really two broad things. I mean, there's plenty. Marketing is a lot of things, right? I mean, so I'm not going to try and cover everything. I'm going to talk about understanding customers, but with a bit of a twist. I'll get to that in a second. And the other is what we can do to manipulate customers. And that sounds awful, but I'm going to say that in a sort of a nicer way. So what's the role of a marketer? What's the role of people in business? Just, sorry? Meet the needs. Anything else? Achieve sales, listen to the market, that sort of thing? Make your customer happy. Okay, so here's the funny thing. The job of the marketer isn't to listen to the customer. The job of the marketer is to influence the customer. It's a very important distinction. You influence the customer and then listen for whether that influence worked. That's quite distinct from passively just listening to customers.
Are you distinguishing a marketer from a salesperson?
To me, sales is a part of marketing. To me, sales and marketing are two, marketing is the discipline, sales is a function within marketing. So, but in essence, marketing's about influencing the customer. It's about knowing the customer to a point where you can tweak certain things and the customer will go, oh, didn't know that was possible, or I suddenly want that. So it's the difference between what a fundamental invention does. So, for example, putting 4 wheels and a motor in the middle, and people go, ooh, I didn't know we didn't need a horse anymore. We just thought we needed a faster horse. So that's the difference between influencing the customer and merely listening to one. Because if you're just listening, you're just looking for a faster horse. So with that, we'll talk about knowing your customer. And I'm going to start with a really important term. If I said those 2 words, and I posted that on Facebook, right? And I get 50 likes. What does that mean? Not a lot. Not a lot, because I don't know what a like means anymore. Because it doesn't actually mean like, right? It's an acknowledgement of sorts. Perhaps it started off being, well, I like that, but then you've got a severed leg photo and people have liked that as well. So clearly, it's no longer a like, right? It's just an acknowledgement of sorts. Okay, so that doesn't make a lot of sense. 50 likes, 5,000 likes, depending on which state of the US you're in, it still doesn't mean much. Now I say, I love Donald Trump, and after you brush off all the rotten eggs that you got at, once I've said that, and then I get 5 likes because I said I love Donald Trump, what that means clearly is 5 people like Donald Trump, right? That makes sense because I've said I love Donald Trump and I get 5 likes. Now I say I hate Donald Trump and I get 50 million likes and Facebook's servers crash. What that tells me though is that a lot of people don't seem to like him, right? So what did I just do? Okay, a little bit more. I did tap into emotion, but what I did was I didn't change the metric of measurement. It's a fundamental point here. I did not change the metric of measurement. I changed what I said so that the same metric means something. When I just said Donald Trump, and I get 50 likes, pick a number. I'm just kidding with the numbers. So say it's 100 likes across the board. I say Donald Trump, 100 likes means nothing. I don't know what that means. I say I love Donald Trump, 100 likes. Now I know 100 people like Donald Trump. I say I hate Donald Trump, 100,000 likes. I couldn't help myself. Then I know a lot of people don't like Donald Trump because all I've done is I've tweaked the message. And yes, I've used emotion, but I've also verified something. The moment we talk in terms of verifying something, the researchers get excited because that's called hypothesis testing. All I've done is I've converted the message into a very rudimentary hypothesis where the simple interaction now confirms something for me. Make sense? All right, let's keep going. Now, look at these 3 sentences. They're arguably sort of marketing messages. No one likes to work alone. Find your next co-founder at hashtag something. Say it's a conference, right? Or grow to a national presence. Plan to get there with hashtag something. Maybe you're a sales company that helps companies scale and get leads and get sales. Yeah? And the last one, everything old is new again with social. Where can this take you? Maybe you're a social media company, right? And again, you can put a URL next to that and things like that. So just remember that. I'll come back to this later. As in, don't remember the message. It's just sort of recognize that with your eidetic memories. All right. So speaking of customers and customer journeys, and that's one of my favorite quotes. And turns out it's not Steve Jobs, and I couldn't figure out who it was, so I'd left that there. But let's focus on the word reward. What's a reward? So a reward is some sort of an accolade, some sort of gives you a feeling of satisfaction, right? If you get rewarded for being the most innovative startup in Ipswich, you'd kind of feel nice, right? So feeling something is ultimately human emotion, right? And so when we think of emotion, it's important to sort of take a step back because everyone talks about, emotion's useful because, people emote and people feel things and then people remember your brand, right? So Cadbury ads back in a time when chocolate was sort of still a thing. Cadbury ads, had all of this, someone running onto the cricket field and, hugging someone. All of you all grown up with those more emotive ads that you sort of remember, or the silly beer commercials where, it makes us laugh, but we ultimately forget which brand it was, which is a different discussion altogether. But ultimately, emotion is what drives memory recall. Yeah? So let's look at emotion. Let's unpack that a bit. So I looked up some research, and I have a research background in another life. I'm doing a doctorate. So that's a lot of writing. Suffice it to say that it comes from some journal articles, so suitably dense and suitably smart sounding, but only focus on these things, those 5 words. Those 5 words, turns out, form the guts of human emotion. They've been split up into multiple things, so you can read papers that talk about 15 things or 12 things or 8 things and all that, but that's kind of the guts of it. But I thought, well, we can do better. As marketers, we can go even deeper. Rather than just looking at an academic paper, I mean, what do researchers know, right? Let's look at a source that we trust even more than this. So what is that source? So I thought, I sort of scanned far and wide, and I came up with the most, trustworthy source I could come up with. And it's got to be right? Because if Pixar says so, it must be true. But here's the interesting thing. It's the exact 5 emotions. So those guys are smart. It's not just any random 5 things. So let's look at each of these 5, and see if we can abstract it in a way that we can make it a little bit more sort of usable from a marketer's point of view, right? And ultimately messaging what we say in the market. All right, so joy. What's joy? Joy's sense of happiness comes from a feeling of gain. So if you win the lottery, you feel happy, right? Or your girlfriend does not leave you, you feel sort of happy after a fight. So that sort of thing is a sense of gain. So material, professional, personal, and you can add more dimensions to it. But I thought I'll take these 3 because it's kind of relatively easy to retranslate. Let's look at loss, the same sort of thing, some sense of loss. Sadness caused by loss, material, personal, professional. and that sort of thing. So if you notice, I'm sort of abstracting the core emotion with another word that's a little bit more directly operationalizable. I normally can't pronounce that properly. Yeah. So fear, a sense of risk. So companies that are risk averse, people that are risk averse, we often talk in terms of, what is fear, right? It's a sense of risk. What if something stuffs up? What if something doesn't work? So dealing with that. So again, a sense of risk. Disgust is a tricky one because it's not feels like a more complex emotion. So the best way I can think about it is sort of, that's the kind of face my daughter makes when I give her way too much broccoli at dinner time. So it's sort of a lack of alignment with what she wants to have. So I ran with alignment. I'm sure you can come up with a more eloquent word or eloquent description, but ultimately a lack of alignment can lead to disgust. It can also, extreme version of that can lead to anger, but then there's another way to interpret anger, which is a little bit more straightforward, and that, of course, is control. So lots of control leads to anger, and that guy's awesome. It's completely unhinged. Have you guys seen the movie? Anyone not seen the movie? Yeah? Okay, so you should check out Inside Out. It's one of the Pixar movies. It's pretty awesome. So now we've got 5 different words. So control, alignment, gain, loss, and risk. So now what we can do is let's try and come up with something, a framework. We're not going to construct the framework. I have a framework after this. But let's try and come up with a framework that we can sort of use as a proxy for all of these 5. So something that we can use to layer messaging that has emotion infused in it. So a slightly more complex version of the I love, I hate Donald Trump sentence that we saw earlier. So let's see what that framework looks like. So this is an example from an actual client. There's a lot of writing here. I just want you to worry about the first bit. So, if you're mapping a particular client's business, so say I go, okay, maybe it's a startup. So maybe as a startup, the growth stage you're in is kind of early stage. And the key question you're asking yourself, if you think of that pure filter column, is can I? And then you're telling yourself, I can. Or if you're a group, can we? And you're telling yourself, we can. Right? It's that feeling of achievability. Can we achieve this? Right? If you're a slightly more active growth company, you could still be a startup, but you're slightly more active growth, which is kind of where we all want to be, right? That's startups. We don't want to be absolutely at that we can, and I don't know, that sort of place. We want to go to the next level. So, ascension. You can use that as a descriptor. I've sort of color-coded them loosely to map across this. So I'm not going to try and explain it for now. We can always discuss that after this, but it's sort of loosely color-coded like that. So for example, if you're a passive growth company, maybe you're not growing as fast as you were when you were active growth or when you were early stage. So it's the idea of renewal. How do you renew, go back to your original sense of growth? What do you need to do? So if you think of this, these are some emotion mixes with a sort of a leading, driving emotion. That's all it is. So achievability is not one discrete emotion. An emotion is rarely like that. But this is one sort of driving part, and there's always going to be trailing elements to it. Now it gets kind of interesting if I go, okay, you could be an early stage company that's arguably maybe small as well, because you could be an early stage company that's not small, right? I mean, you might raise a lot of money. So for example, Groupon went from 30 million in revenue in the first year to 2.4 billion in revenue in year 2. So that's kind of fast, right? That's rather quick. So certainly early stage company, but certainly not small, right? But most companies, early stage and small, kind of make sense. So what if we mixed and matched this feeling with this idea of if you're early stage, the next thing is kind of important, right? getting that next employee, getting that next office, getting that next client, next sale, right? That +1. Wherever you're at, if you're a small company, you want to go one more thing, and then one more thing. So you want to keep growing with that incremental focus. So if I combine those two and then put some words behind it, it might lead to something interesting, and we'll see that shortly. Similarly, there's plenty of combinations here, but I'm going to focus on just the top bit, okay? So in the future slide, in the coming slides. So say you're an early stage company and you're a startup. It's fair to say no one likes to work alone, right? That's why we're in co-working spaces, right? That's why we go to incubators, because we're a social animal. So no one likes to work alone. That's kind of a sad feeling, right? No one likes to work alone. But now if you're, say, promoting a conference, promoting an event, or promoting a co-working space, well, arguably, you could bump into that next great co-founder that becomes that great partnership that builds that great company that you haven't yet built. So for every Steve, there's a Woz, right? I mean, that sort of thing. So that's an uplifting feeling. So if I said no one likes to work alone, find your next great co-founder at Fire Station 101, we'll see you there, Ipswich happening, blah. What I've suddenly done is I'm not selling Fire Station 101 at all. I'm giving you a reason that tugs at you a little bit. Does that make sense? And then I am layering it with some tactical bits. So if I simply said no one likes to work alone, find your next great co-founder at, that'd be a bit abrupt. Doesn't actually still mean anything much. But then if I round it off and add a little tactical piece to it and go, there's a 30% special on, whatever you want to say after that, I've hopefully hooked you in with a bit of emotion, layered it with something else that makes more nuanced meaning, and then done something a little bit more standard marketing. Make sense? So that's kind of an interesting approach, isn't it? It's nothing new in terms of the outcome. So advertisers and marketers have used emotion as messaging pulls and triggers like for 50 years. But it's usually a function of a copywriter that's really good with words. And if something doesn't work, how many times have we had a situation where you've said something on Facebook and you got 117 likes and you got really pleased about it, and then you said something else and you got 3 likes. And you go, oh, no one likes me anymore, right? I mean, it's depressing. And you can really get into that. I mean, there are plenty of people that are, we all have a bit of narcissism in us. The selfie is pretty much the epitome of, useless narcissism, unless it's in a group. So in that sort of thing, how do we replicate success? Because it's a bit like saying, we said Donald Trump, could be something, instead of that, and it worked. 500 people liked it. So how do I repeat that? More cat videos? I don't know. That's not viable. How do you repeat something that works, discard something that doesn't work, but then maybe you can salvage a part of it that did work? You can't do that if all you're doing is putting pretty words together, which is essentially what a lot of copywriting ends up being. What I'm showing you here is a bit of a structured engineering style, Lego style building block approach to building a message. You'll still end up in the same place, but now something doesn't work. You've sort of tested combinations. You can plug this thing out and plug something back in. And let me sort of expand on that further. So before I go further, this is a broad framework that I've put together. We use in my company, but this is a consulting framework as well. And we call it Agile Strategy because it's the idea of, and everything that you're seeing is sort of a commercial hypothesis testing approach applied to messaging. That's essentially what you're seeing. It's a way of applying a research-based mindset, but making it relatively straightforward and easy to use in day-to-day message generation, because most of us aren't researchers. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we can have a framework that we can use that by definition forces us to test without us realizing it, without us realizing, oh, we've got a hypothesis, we don't really fully know how that is spelled, then, then becomes challenging, because, this is not our job. We're not, our job is the business that we're in. Our job is not to be great testers. And being data-driven, everyone talks about being data-driven. Being data-driven is not about collecting all the data and then trying to work out, oh crap, no, what does this mean? Because that's what we do. We say things like Donald Trump, 500 likes, and you go, okay, so now we've got to figure out what that means. Whereas the actual answer lies in saying something that allows the interaction to confirm something for you. That's what being truly data-driven means. So, okay, so I won't take you through all of that, but suffice it to say that it's a multi-tier experimentation approach. I'm going to expand these two in the next slide, and then hopefully it'll make a bit more sense. And I'm happy to discuss this in more detail if any of you want later on. Right, so if you notice, we've already seen these terms now. So achievability, ascension, and new, +1, and all of that. These are some of the company stages, early stage, and so on. So the message mix that comes from there is these 6 little message parts. So message parts, no one likes to work alone, grow to a national presence, and so on and so forth. And all we're doing, we're still not attaching the tactical bits, but that part's easy. But all we're doing, we're going, so if we combined that with that, which is coming from that little matrix of +1 with something else, then we kind of end up with something that a copywriter might write. And if we add a tactical piece to that, then you end up with a full-blown marketing message. It could be an ad, could be a Facebook post, could be a tweet, it could be a Google ad. And the key difference, again, being that every interaction that occurs now will confirm something for you. Whereas earlier, we're just saying Donald Trump. Because we're not constructing our messaging to confirm an underlying assumption. Here, the underlying assumption is that this emotion with that emotion, do people resonate with that? And if enough people do, then we know, okay, we can maybe rinse and repeat that. We come up with multiple messages that align with that sort of emotion mix, multiple messages that align with that emotion mix, and combine and see what happens. So you have a structure to build up to, rather than just coming up with the full thing, which is actually quite hard to do. You can do it for 5 messages, try creating 500 of those. So there are lots of small businesses that really struggle with that. What am I saying on Friday? I'm going away to Byron Bay for a week. I have no idea what I'm saying. So we have a group with 500 people. We have 1,200 likes. What does that mean? What am I saying? Look, I'm at Byron Bay? Really? These are your customers. Why do they care that you're in Byron Bay? Right? What are we saying that makes them care about what you do and what your business does and what you stand for? All of that comes from human emotion. So that gives you a sense of how you can sort of go from a structure and combine and come back to the original slide a few slides ago when I said, look at those sentences and we'll come back to that. These are the exact same messages. So what are the key takeaways then? The question that you want to ask yourself is not, this is the point I made right at the beginning. The question you want to ask yourself is not what the customer is doing. So there's a lot of this conversation around customer journey mapping. How many people have heard of journey mapping? Yeah, a few of you, okay. So the simplistic approach to customer journey mapping is quite literally standing back and seeing what the customer is doing and trying to remove roadblocks so that the customer can get from point A to point B more easily. But what if that point B is the wrong point B? How do you know that? So if you're only removing roadblocks, then you're sort of really not listening enough. The goal needs to be, what do we want the customer to do? What path do we want the customer to take? Because the customer will follow that path if you do it properly. What do we want the customer to do rather than let's just observe the customer and then react? No, we want to influence the customer and then listen if the customer is getting influenced. And then, of course, work out if the customer wants to go there and we were there, then, of course, there's a problem. But you've got to first throw that out there and see if the customer whacks it back at you. If the customer doesn't, then clearly they're not in the same court. Then it's just you playing the game. So the two questions you've got to ask yourself, as marketers, as startup guys, what do you say? And how do you know? How do you know that anyone gives a damn? That's really important. Like, as startup founders, we tend to often get pretty lost in the value of our own, perceived value of our own idea. And the honest truth really often is, and not many people other than Chad might tell you that, is really it's only important to you. How do we know it's important? It's going to be important to other people. So you'll have to figure out, what do I need to say so that I can communicate the value that I perceive to my potential market? And I've got to have a mechanism to say stuff in a manner that confirms or unconfirms that assumption. Because ultimately, if people don't care, then either you've got to say something a bit different, or you've got to pack up and go home. If you successfully end up saying something different and something different and something different, it's called pivoting. That's the fancy term, right? You're saying something different and people go, oh, okay. And then to match up with that, you're doing something different. Then you're saying something different, then you're doing something different, and eventually you've pivoted. Congratulations, right? But you've got to have that approach where, how do you learn? How do you know? So what do you say? How do you know? Take your customer on a deliberate journey. It's your business. They may have never heard of it. They don't know what to expect. They're used to horse-driven carriages, and you've got a car. You've got to explain to them. And don't be shy about doing that. Don't expect them to get it. And there's plenty of entrepreneurs that do that. Don't just expect people to get it. Make the effort to make them get it. And if you try really hard and you figure out, well, no one really gets it, then maybe you should change. But make that effort. Don't just expect, he's an idiot, he doesn't get it. No, keep trying, because not everyone's an idiot. All messaging should validate. And if you're not testing, you're guessing. None of that's new. But this is pretty important. This is probably the one thing that you should take away from this. If something doesn't work, if you've built up something that comes from a structure that you can go back to, then you can change things. But if you've just come up with this amazing line and then it fell flat, then you're hunting for the next amazing line. That just may not happen. And most of us in small businesses can't afford, Saatchi to write our cool taglines, right? So you've got to have a structure. And that's what that structure was, what I just showed you. So this is the only slide where I talk about my product. So it's called Engaged. It's a customer engagement platform. And it does exactly this. It does all of this in an automatic, semi-machine-generated fashion. So it does emotion-based messaging, takes care of all of the testing and insights, and it sits atop a whole bunch of technology. So marketing automation platform, social media scheduling, and we will eventually do ad management as well. So it's essentially, the idea is it's done for you messaging, sitting on top of marketing automation. The key frustration that I've had, and I'm going to flick forward because this is not a plug for the platform. The key frustration that I've had over the years is every marketing tool that I've come across has no marketing in it. It's just a tool. So when you think of marketing automation, it's just an automation platform. It's just an if this, then that, else this platform. If you say this, and if you know what you're saying, and people care about what you're saying, then if something else happens, you can say this. It's got nothing to do with marketing. So HubSpot has nothing to do with marketing. It's what you say that is marketing, right? And that entire bit is missing, because engineering firms build marketing platforms. Just look at Google. We have awful ads. They're called Google AdWords. Just an SMS with a link in it. Really? But that's the world we live in. So our job as technologists, this is taking a different tone here. Our job as technologists is to not get lost in technology all the time, which is what we're attempting, is we've got to tackle the creative layer. Not just say to small businesses, you need to write better copy. Here's, sign up to inbound.org and read these 1,700 books on copywriting, and you'll be fine. It doesn't work that way, because you're not a copywriter. So it's time technology took on those cudgels, and that's what we're trying to do. So it's a creative layer that's semi-automated. So I won't use the word AI, but it's semi-automated. Human curation meets machine-driven creation. So why do I have this quote? And the fact that it's not Henry Ford is also mildly disturbing, because I, again, couldn't figure out who said it. Apparently, it's Einstein or Henry Ford or someone else. But this is how we look at data. We look at data looking backwards. So we collect the data, and then we try and figure out what that means. So how many people have heard of Google Analytics? Hopefully all of you. If you haven't, you really should. So with Google Analytics, how many people think that time spent on a web page, the higher that is, the better it is? You know, generally, you know, page views, page view duration. Come on, most of us say that. Most of us think that, right? But what if you're Google? Is time spent on page a good thing? No. So clearly, it's the context that drives that assessment, right? Like, yes, I gave you an example of Google, which is the extreme end of it. So, but why do we walk around thinking that, oh, we need more people to spend more time on our website? What does that mean? What if that's a bad thing? What if we actually want people to get in and get out? What if people understand things quicker? How do you know that if all you're doing is designing things so that once the data comes to you, Google Analytics and all of that, you go, okay, so 4.8 pages per visit, 50% bounce rate. How do you know 50% is good or bad? Why not 10%? Why not 98%? You know, so Google.com will have a ridiculously high bounce rate, right? But it's one of the world's most valuable websites. So what gives? So the only reason that's okay is because the context drives that insight. If you don't include context in the way you're interpreting data, and in this example that I sort of took you through, that context is deliberately designing communication so that the interaction, even though the interaction is somewhat one-dimensional, means something to you. So don't look at data after the fact. Embed something that confirms something for you. So when the data comes to you, it comes to you with meaning. Does that more or less make sense? So that's what that is. Because if you always do what you've always done, if you always look at data historically, you're always going to get the same kind of insight, and you're not going to get anywhere. There is no discovery then. So I believe that's the last slide. So I deliberately called it Welcome to the Beginning because there's a lot to do after this, right? So thanks for your time. Hopefully that added some value, and I'll take any questions if you have time. Oh, thank you.